Hello, Mommy Spot Tampa. Thank you for joining. Hello. Thank you all for joining. Tonight, let me first introduce myself. Hi, I am Brooke-Sidney with Bella and the Babe, and my site, my business is all about empowering authentic motherhood. And today is part 4 of the Conscious Parent Book Club. So we are reading and discussing The Conscious Parent, which is by Dr. Shefali Sabari. This is an Oprah favorite. Dr. Shefali has been on Oprah's show talking about this amazing book. And for those of you that watch Marie Forleo's show online, she's been featured there. It's an amazing work that really stretches the way we think about parenting. It's completely, thanks Fab and Singer for joining. It's completely new thinking, new philosophies for how we parent our children. And so I always say that even if we don't fully agree with everything Dr. Shefali advises, hi Lauren, hi Coke Millie, thank you so much for joining. At least what she does is she encourages us to think about what we do believe, to think about how we do choose to parent. And it helps us even get clear on our own philosophies. Hi, Duet. Thank you so much for joining. I love that you all are here. Yay. So tonight, I actually have decided to do chapter 4 in 2 parts because it is so jam-packed with lots of information. And I think, hi, LaBelle. Thanks so much for joining. I think that it would be hi, Alvaro Show 15. Thank you for joining. I think that it would be completely overwhelming to cover it all in one Periscope, or else I would be keeping you on here way too long. Hi, Billy. Thank you for joining. So we're going to do half tonight and then half on our next Periscope, which will probably be either a Monday or Thursday of this week or Monday of next week. So tonight we're going to talk about the ego. Thanks, Alessandra, for joining. And basically, this chapter is all about a blow to our ego. That's what chapter 4 is even entitled. So tonight, we're going to talk about 3 basic points. Hello. Hi, Alessandra. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited you guys are here. And I'd love to get your comments and feedbacks. You don't have to have read the book. A lot of it is just parenting instinct and the way that we think about parenting. So feel free to jump in with your thoughts or questions as I'm going through what I found to be 3 of the major points in the first half of the chapter. Thanks, JC, for joining. So the first thing is that the first point is really that we want to fully accept our children, and that means losing the ego. And for those of you, hi Raiden, thank you for joining. For those of you that were not on our last scope about chapter 3, chapter 3 was all about accepting our children as who they are, not as who we want them to be. Hello, JC, but who they are at their core. And that means accepting them fully, not based on praise. Hello, Raiden, thank you for joining. It really means accepting our children and losing our ego. And the big thing about parenting is that it kind of begins with our ego. And I thought this was pretty on point. She says our journey begins with a high level of ego narcissism. It's an energy that we kind of take into our relationship with our children. Like most of us, what she's saying, most of us started with the idea of, oh, I want to be a mother. That's ego. Or, oh, I want to be a great mother, right? I want to prove that I can be a good mother or good father. Again, ego. Or I always wanted a family. That comes from an ego-driven need or ego-driven longing. So although it seems harmless, it still gets us trapped in what she's saying, trapped in our egoic mind. And she's saying basically it's hard not to be egoic. Hi, thanks MJZ for inviting followers. Thank you so much. It's hard not to be egoic. I mean, we think about our children, especially I think even the mothers, we birth them, as our children, ours, mine. And really, they're their own beings. They came here with their own purpose, right? And so it's really hard not to be egoic. I think that that's an important thing for us to remember as we try to become more conscious parent or try to stretch. Thanks for the hearts. Thank you so much. As we try to become less egoic and more conscious, it's important to realize that this is hard. Like, it's not easy. It's not the natural way in which we think about parenting. And few parents can even allow their children to exist outside of themselves. I think we talked about in chapter 1 how we think of children often as our mini-me's, or we hope they're our mini-me's. So thank you so much, Jello Poppy, and all of you that have since joined in since we began the scope. I'm so happy that you are here. Feel free to jump in with your comments or questions at any point. We're just on number 1. But basically, it's really interesting to think about the fact that, parenthood as a journey, especially the way it is today, is very ego-driven. But it helps us understand it and think about it in a new way. So number 2 is basically how the ego functions. And so Dr. Shefali says that ego is a blind attachment to the image we have of ourselves. It's the picture of ourselves. It's what we carry around all the time. It's basically our entire way of thinking. JC driven, are you a Christian? I'm not really sure how that is relevant for this, but anyway, so let me continue. It goes around basically our ego is our entire way of thinking, emoting, and acting, and it's rooting in this self-image. So ego is like basically our perception of ourselves, and it's very hard to get out of thinking about ourselves like in that manner and freeing ourselves from thinking about being who we think we are, right? It's almost like 2 levels of thought. So she says, we find it difficult to sit with the knowledge that there may be a piece of us that contributed to whatever negativity we are experiencing in our life, preferring to place responsibility for our situation on factors in the world around us. And that's why it's such a hard time for many people when they come across Dr. Shefali's work to think that, thank you so much for the hearts, to think that there's a part of ourselves that we have to change or grow to become better parents. In an egoistic traditional structure, parents are right. It's top down. And Dr. Shefali is basically saying, no, it's more circular. It's not hierarchical structure with parents and children. Like, we can learn from them and they can learn from us. Not to say that it's permissive, but that there's a flow and there's an understanding. There's a circular relationship instead of a top-down traditional I am controlling and dominating the child. Let's see, MJ, how do you get over the ego when you are wrong? Well, I think that, there's kind of like it's sort of like that's a 2-part question. So how to get over the ego? I think the first part of that is recognizing that we do have an ego and recognizing in the moment that we're operating in our ego. And that's a process. I think that's a process. I think that by the very nature of you even coming onto this scope, there's a part of you that's concerned about parenting more consciously and identifying the ego. And so by even stepping out in that moment and seeing, ooh, am I acting out of my true self, or am I acting, hello, Nasi Wald from Brazil, that I'm acting out of my ego. And the other part that you said is, how can I do it when I'm wrong? Part of that becomes trying to get back to a more neutral state. It's like trying to not operate when you're upset, you're frustrated, you're agitated, especially with your children. You want to try to get back to a state where you're calm and collected and more rational and can see your ego more clearly. So it's kind of a 2-part thing. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that answered your question. So back to our point 2, which is how the ego functions. It's basically, again, it's our blind attachment to the image that we have of ourselves. And it's also important for parents to know, it's part of the reason why it's so hard for us to think that there's something about ourselves that we need to change to parent better. Because change threatens our ego. It threatens our identity. We like thinking that we are a certain way and keeping it that way. But But the whole idea behind not living in an egoic state is that we fail to see others authentically as who they are. We fail to see their true being and their true essence. So she gives a really good example in the book of a first generation immigrant. Stuart was the father and his son Samuel. So, Stuart had worked all of these jobs, and he really wanted his son to have this really secure job, like be super successful, go to college, make a lot of money, things that he wasn't able to do. But Samuel, on the other hand, he wanted to be an actor, and that was his calling. And so his father, I think even at one point in the story, threatens that I'm not going to help you in college unless you go to business school. And so his son ended up actually going to business school and not listening to his true calling, and even knew to that day that he bent his will and his spirit to meet his father's. And so he didn't live his true self. He knew that acting, even though he wasn't a successful businessman, he knew that acting was indeed his calling and his purpose. And so it was a really good example of how, Samuel's father, he parented from what he knew. So it's not blaming, it's not blaming Stuart at all. It's just recognizing that he projected onto his son his own fears. And in this particular case, it was his fear of uncertainty, his fear of not being successful. And his son, Samuel, that's what he knew, and he wanted to please his father. So the challenge is to see our ego, but to also know that it really prevents us from living authentically. If you are inauthentic, you will have difficulty allowing your children to be authentic. If you can't model it, we are our models for our children. If you don't model authenticity, it's really hard for your children to know what it is and what it looks like. So that's one aspect to why we don't want to be in our egoic state all the time. And the second part is that we're really missing the opportunity to connect with our children authentically. So our third and final point is that ego attachments mask our fears. This kind of got to what MJ, I think his name's MJK or MJL, was asking about ego and doing it when we're wrong. A lot of times we don't know that we're doing something wrong, right? Because you have to be at a certain level of awareness to even recognize that, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, or I've been hurt and I'm operating out of that space. But our ego attachments are a mask usually for our fears. They're the greatest form of kind of unconsciousness. Like they really are a mask for where we are not conscious. And oftentimes they're just covering up our fears. When we come from ego rather than being a pure being, we don't connect with our children's essential being. We don't. As a result, they grow up feeling disconnected from their own essence. Again, if we are not showing these characteristics, then our children won't see them and can't model them. So the other point to think about too is that if we project onto them, they're essentially a blank canvas. When we project onto them, then we're not allowing their true nature to be seen. We're putting what we want them to be onto them. So the question she has us to ask is, are you willing to give up thinking and step down from your ego pedestal of authority and allow yourself to learn from these creatures who are most able to live in their state of egoic consciousness? Now, as we almost all of us know, that children have this pure state of joy and happiness and freedom and expansiveness. And honestly, and we talked about this in the earlier chapters, they've come here with their own purpose, and they also can teach us things in the process. And so it's awesome when we can free ourselves from this egoic thinking to really get in touch with them, because they're in a space that has less egoic attachment to it. They're in a much more free state. And so it's really amazing if we can free ourselves from the ego. So just want to ask if there are any questions out there. Is this making any sense? Sorry, my tripod keeps moving. Is this making any sense? Any questions about ego in our children? I know it's kind of it's pretty philosophical, but just to recap, thanks for the heart. Just to recap, the 3 points is: 1, we want to fully accept our children, and that requires us to lose the ego. And also, we're recognizing that as parents, it's normal. Like in the society we live in, parenthood is attached to our ego. It's a part of the journey, but it's a new way of thinking to dissect it from parenthood. And then number 2, we discussed basically how the ego functions, and it's basically our attachment to how we think things should be, or our image of ourselves. And, with that, why it's important to parent authentically so our children can be authentic. And then 3, it was that our ego attachments really mask our fears. And so it's not a blame game. It's just trying to understand where our ego shows up so that we can become more conscious of it and then become more conscious parents. So I hope this scope has been helpful. I really hope you all will tune in for the next one. I really enjoyed talking to you all. So again, my name is Brooke-Sidney, and my site is Bella and the Babe, and it's all about empowering authentic motherhood. And I'd love for you to check it out and visit. And I hope you have an amazing Monday evening. Thanks so much.